The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
I think, in case people wonder what's going on, like sometimes you and I will spend 2 hours talking about our week and we kind of forget to record the episode. And I've been trying to steer us back. It's very difficult sometimes, like, because a lot of what we talk about couldn't be put on the air anyways, because it's ongoing things in our lives. And then I sit down and I've been trying to find cases that aren't really covered so much. And I know you get obsessed with live trials. I personally have gotten to a point where I have so much going on that, like, I've been looking at older things because it's less technology, it's less clear what happened. And I ran across this old case. It's 46 years old, to be specific. It's out of North Carolina. And something happened with this where it had caught my attention in mid-2024. I want to say it was like the 45th anniversary that somebody had put an article out. And now they're really digging into this case.
I just want to say, I realize, I think some of our sources are out of North Carolina, but I believe it happened in South Carolina.
Oh, you know what? It's a North Carolina couple who was in South Carolina. You're correct.
Okay.
But the question is kind of, where did it all happen? You're right. The bodies are found in Greenville County, South Carolina. And this is a 1978 case. It's from the summer of 1978. What caught my attention on this is this amazing piece by WBTV. It's done by Kelsey Grader and John Carter, and they published this February 26, 2025. So we're coming up on 47 years, I guess. It's an unsolved murder. But the way they put this together, there's a video I think you can watch. There's a lot of information that they get out of this sergeant that is working on this double homicide. And I decided I wanted to cover it for one reason only. They put so much information about this case out there that I think this is a case where, like, audience members, like listeners, or I guess viewers, if you're watching the video, could solve it. Like, they could come up with a theory that, like, points in the right direction, or maybe they know something about these people, or they know something about the situation. So Kelsey Grader and John Carter write all of this up with this sergeant, and it is so fascinating to me how they did it. And this is my thought on it, and you then we'll kind of go into the case, and you can tell me your thoughts on it if you want to. This is where true crime should go. Like, this is what it should be doing. Like this kind of coverage. It is so thorough.
I don't disagree with that. I feel like this is a case that it should have been solved, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. And the fact that it wasn't, I feel like that'll be really obvious as we go through.
I think so too. So again, the source for this is WBTV, which is technically out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm gonna read from some of this, and then we're gonna talk about it as we go. From the headline, it's murdered North Carolina couple tied up, blindfolded, strangled. in 1978, where the cold case stands. And the subheadline is Detectives Still Working to Solve 46-Year-Old Mystery. In July of 1978, the bodies of a man and woman are found in a creek in an area of Greenville County, South Carolina, known as the Dark Corner. David Clemenshaw, 28, and Donna McCracken had their hands tied behind their backs, they're blindfolded, and both of them have been strangled. No arrests have ever been made in connection with their deaths. Although there were very few clues to go on, a sergeant with the Greenville County Sheriff's Office is optimistic that this 46-year-old double murder case can still be solved. Sergeant Jason Cox has looked over the case dozens of times. He's part of the Greenville County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit, made up of investigators who are still looking for who killed the couple and why. Sergeant Cox says, each time we review the case, we get closer. And I'm going to pause and talk about some of this. One of the things they do here is they really humanize this couple. There are tons of photos of them. One of the first photos that they have in here is of David, and he's standing feeding a bunch of ducks on a waterfront. He's standing by a car. It's very clearly from the dress and from the car and everything that you see, like a 70s picture, but it puts him front and center. And they follow it up with a picture of Miss McCracken where, she's sitting on a couch with what appears to be family members around her, and they've cropped it in close on her. And they talk about these guys in a way that really makes you feel like you know them. It says that the two of them had been dating and they were living together in Asheville, North Carolina. So David is from Massachusetts originally. He's a Navy veteran, and they call him a mechanist here. They say that he is divorced and he had a daughter. Now, with Donna, she was a secretary at what was known as the Mountain Area Education Foundation. She had spent most of her life in North Carolina and had gone to high school in Swanoa. According to Jan Gray, who talks in this article and was a classmate with Donna at Owen High School, Donna was a sweetheart. She was in the accelerated classes, so she was really smart. She was kind of shy, but once you got to know her, she opened up and was hilarious. Jan Gray remembers the last time that she saw Donna. She said Donna had a new boyfriend, and although she was going to get to meet him for the first time, she was very excited about spending time with her. They talked, they laughed, they listened to music. Jan says she seemed very happy and she was just gaga over him. But she also says she didn't like him. I don't know why I didn't like him, but it was just a red flag from the word go. One part of the night that Jan remembers vividly is the moment that Donna showed her a lot of drugs. She admits that they all smoked pot together at the house that night, but she says she wasn't prepared for what she saw as she was leaving. She said, "Let me show you what's in the freezer." And then she opened it up and said, "Here's the LSD, here's the peyote, here's the yada, yada, yada." We got to the car and we thought, she is in over her head. So it's the 70s, it's the summertime. But what she's describing is it's a lot more drugs than I think the average person has their hands on. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would say that. I'm not entirely certain if that was immediately before July 7th. Do you have any idea?
I don't know. And the reason that I'm saying I don't know is because they say that the couple was going to get drugs on the way to a music festival they were headed to.
Right.
So, and this is according to a supplemental report that the officer shares for this article with the writers. It says, according to a supplemental report put together by Sergeant Cox, Donna and David were last seen on July 7th, 1978. They had been planning to go to a festival in Cherokee County the following day, but on the way, they planned to stop in Madison County to buy drugs. according to like what the police have provided here, Donna and David never make it to the festival. Donna's mom ends up reporting the couple missing after they don't show up. And Sergeant Cox says that he believes, this is his quote, somewhere between their house and Madison County, something happened. 4 days after the couple was last seen, on July the 7th, 1978, 2 farm workers find the bodies of Donna and David in a creek along a large bean field off of what's known as Barton Road in Tigerville, South Carolina. And this is part of that remote area that the authors talked about at the beginning called the Dark Corner. And Sergeant Cox says at the time, the Dark Corner is where you went when you wanted to get away with something. So it's kind of a no man's land. And I thought he meant like kind of a lover's lane, but I believe he means body disposal, illicit drug activity. Like this is kind of the place that you go, is my interpretation now. Did you get a different interpretation of that?
No, I felt like I did not envision it to be a lover's lane. I was thinking like drugs or whatever.
Yeah. So David is found face down in the middle of the creek. He doesn't have a shirt on. His pants were pulled down and described as being well below his waist, and his underwear is like showing. Sergeant Cox says that Donna's body had been stuffed into a crevice that was along the bank of the creek, and she was bent at the waist in like a fetal position. So her torso is like coming close to her knees, and her knees are bent, but her body is kind of bent in half. That's the way they describe her. But she's fully clothed. And according to the notes that they make here, they say that both of the bodies appeared to have been covered in water at some point. The investigators who work on this case initially, they were not able to identify the bodies because of the state of decomposition. David ends up being identified by a tattoo on his shoulder. And investigators are able to then walk it back and connect it to a missing persons case out of Asheville, North Carolina. The first autopsy lists their cause of death as undetermined for both parties. But a follow-up autopsy reveals that both of them were strangled to death. There's an article that was published in the Greenville News on July 15th of 1978. They quote it in here in the WBTV article as the coroner saying, the new autopsy finding means that the two could have been strangled either with a rope or some other ligature or someone's hands. Jan Gray, upon learning about this, she gives the quote to WBTV that strangulation seems so personal and vindictive and horrible. According to a 1978 police report about the discovery of the bodies, Donna and David were blindfolded or pieces of a torn Western-style shirt, and they had been tied up with twine. David's shirt is missing. And in the photograph that they give us of David at the top of the article, he's wearing a similar style shirt. So investigators believe that it could have been used to potentially blindfold the couple. Even though Donna is fully clothed when she's found, there was a note that her shirt was on inside out. Sergeant Cox says maybe something different happened to her. There was never a sexual assault kit done on either victim. The reason why they didn't do a sexual assault kit was because in the 70s, with the state of the decomposition of the bodies, they just wouldn't have been able to do it. This is according to Sergeant Cox. So one of the things they do that's really cool here, and this article will definitely be in the show notes, is Sergeant Cox has made all the documents available. So you can actually click through here and you can dig into the police reports and some of the case file. It's still not known why Donna and David were murdered. Sergeant Cox says it was noted in the original case file that their murders could have potentially been drug-related. His quote here is, "I don't think it was anything as far as drug trafficking or drug distribution. I think it may have been as simple as going to buy some marijuana, because this is the 70s. Jan Gray, quoted again, says she believes the murders could have been drug-related. She says she even asked Donna's sister about it. I wondered if the family knew anything about it at all, so I just said, do you think drugs were involved? And she says that Donna's sister said, yes, we do think drugs are involved. Sergeant Cox says, I think the possibility of them being victims was more of the opportunity for a robbery. He noted that David had withdrawn money from the bank right before this trip out to the festival. So it's going to be right before July 7th when the two of them disappear. He said they may have had plenty of cash on hand when they went missing. In the original police report, investigators note that Donna and David's pockets are empty. There's no purse, no wallet, no car keys. There's no house keys. There's nothing, like, even for their home in Asheville. They don't find it. They'd never find these items at the crime scene. They never find these items at their home up in Asheville. When they go to the house and do a search, they take photos, but they note that there's no evidence of any kind of struggle at the home. They did say that there was food still on the stove. There were dirty dishes that were out. And investigators at the time came to the conclusion that the couple potentially left their home in a hurry for an unknown reason, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Another interesting note here, and this is like one thing that always stands out to me every time I'm reading something, is they both had dogs. And the dogs were missing from their Asheville home. But they were later found on a back road in Madison County, North Carolina. So, I don't know do you do that? I always wonder what happened to the dogs.
Well, I do always notice, typically if they were outside dogs, or especially since they were going to be gone for a little bit, if they had left them outside, I think after a little while, dogs get impatient and run off or whatever.
Or if they had left them with someone, that could give more clues. Seems
dogs, like they would have figured that out, right?
Pretty early, I think they could have figured that out, yeah. Sergeant Cox says that the original lead investigator in the case was convinced that he knew who had killed the couple, but they never had the evidence to prove it. According to his quotes to WBTV, December 1978, a couple of people were heard bragging about murders at a party. And potentially these murders. The pair reportedly bragged about how they had hitchhiked and they were picked up by a man and woman who they had robbed and killed. The pair also reportedly told others that they had ditched the couple's car near a swimming hole near Ivy Creek in Madison County after it got stuck in the sand. And that's exactly where David's yellow 1996 Pontiac Catalina was found on July 13th, 1978. So this is the car being found, I think, is a huge deal. It's found 2 days after the bodies, and it's not near the bodies. They put a couple of photos in here. It's way more stuck than I thought it was going to be. Did you see how deep this thing is in the sand?
Yes, I was very stuck.
According to Sergeant Cox, these two individuals could have just been bragging about something that they had read in the paper, and seemed like they were maybe trying to take credit for it, and they had nothing to do with it. While those two people were in prison for another crime, apparently the former investigator on this case questioned them about the murders, but they never admitted anything. Both of these men have since died, and that's the one thing they don't do here that bothers me a little bit, is they don't name the men. Sergeant Cox says just because they pass away doesn't mean that this case is closed. You still have to prove that they did it. According to him, they've investigated many other leads, many other theories, but nothing has panned out so far. There are different theories that you're going to come up with in these cases, but the one thing you have to make sure of is that the theory fits the evidence, and the evidence can't change. It can't be manipulated or changed at all. Your theory has to fit with what speaks and not the other way around. Cox says it's also still a mystery as to how and why the bodies of David and Donna ended up in Greenville County, South Carolina. According to his statements here, he says that he believed it was more of a disposal site. The location is pretty isolated away from where anybody just would have known about it unless they had intimate information. In the supplemental report by Sergeant Cox, it was noted that the twine used to help tie the blindfolds on McCracken and Climshaw was similar to twine used in bean fields to tie together beanstalks. And according to all of this, they are looking for someone who had intimate knowledge of the area where David and Donna's bodies were found. He says, I'm still trying to find out as much information that I can because I believe that individual is still alive. Evidence has been hard to come by, according to the investigators. Cox says it's likely that rain washed away possible clues where the bodies were found, and there were never any plaster casts made for footprints. He said there was nothing that could help explain how McCracken and Climshaw got to the creek. There were no drag marks on their shoes, no damage to any crops nearby, and no tire marks in the field. David's car, which was found in Madison County, North Carolina, had been ransacked by the time it was found. With any type of evidence, would it be DNA or fingerprints, one thing you have to look at is it supposed to be there? Does it have any business being in that spot? Cox says he hopes that additional testing, which he declined to identify what type of testing may be going on, may reveal something new. He says, my hope is with new advances in technology that we might still be able to re-examine their clothes. He also told WBTV that some items from the car had been sent off for some type of testing. He said, we may not be able to solve it right now, but it will get solved one day. We're not giving up. He says that anybody with information about this case would be asked to call Crime Stoppers of Greenville, and he gives the phone numbers 864-232-7463. So Crime Stoppers of Greenville is 864-232-7463. And you can also go on to Crime Stoppers of Greenville. If you put that into Google, it'll take you to a website that you can check out. There's a ton of photos in here to check out the different crime scenes, the dogs. They have multiple photos. And the most important part to me was they put the police reports in here. They put both the original incident report. I'm going to go over that, though. If people want to read it, it's at the link that's going to be down below in the show notes. They also put the supplemental report, which has 5 pages in it. I find police reports through time to be fascinating. It's amazing what they capture at different times, you know. So this one says, officers first directed to place off Barton Road near Tigerville to where 2 people had been found dead by field workers that were working for the complainant. So the complainant here is a nearby landowner. Officers observed bodies and asked for CID. They roped off the area and kept the same area clear. One subject appears to be a young white female, the other a young white male. Officer observed that both subjects' hands are tied behind bodies with what looks like ladies' pantyhose. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
So they then go on to say below named officers from the Police Service Bureau responded to area north of Tigerville where 2 bodies had been located by migrant farm workers. Bodies were located in a small stream running adjacent to a field that approximately 100 to 150 feet from the end of the dirt road leading to the field. What appeared to be a small path led from the field through about 15 feet of wooded area to the stream. Body number 1 is that of a Caucasian male, observed lying on his left side with his head facing downstream with his body angled slightly toward the bank. The body was resting in approximately 3 to 4 inches of water. Both hands were noted to be tied at the wrists behind the back with what appeared to be strips of cloth, possibly a shirt. Okay, I'm going to start talking about this because what's different about those 2 things in the same report?
The hose and then the shirt?
Right.
I think that I think that the officers didn't get super close.
So you think the initial report is just they're saying that they're tied up, and from where they're standing, maybe it could have been a hose.
Under the circumstances of, like, because this is what I imagine. I imagine that they saw it, and the strips are probably dirty, right?
Yeah, from being in the water too. Yeah.
Right. And so if they were consistently dirty without a closer look, especially if they would have to be pretty thin strips. Otherwise, they could take them right off. Pretty thin strips of a shirt could absolutely look like hose to an officer who was observing the scene of two bodies, right?
Right.
And so I think he just said the first thing that came to mind, possibly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And if you're particularly sensitive to how bodies are found, this is your warning, because I'm going to talk about it. He states that the victim is attired in blue denim trousers, no belt, jockey undershorts, dark socks, and low-cut sneaker-type shoes. Victim was not wearing a shirt, but rather a large piece of dark cloth was observed by his face and neck area. This was later determined to be the sleeve from a shirt, approximately 23 inches in length with 4 snap-type fasteners. It had been apparently utilized as a face mask inasmuch as it had been fastened to the facial area with a piece of string similar to kite flying string. The body was in a rather advanced state of decomposition, heavily infested about the head with flies, fly larvae, beetles, etc. The body had a heavy growth of red-brown hair, a mustache with a Yankee Clipper captain type beard. So they're describing something interesting here that is kind of left out of the other part. It's not just a, quote, blindfold. It almost sounds to me, and you could tell me if you think differently, like they were using a shirt sleeve as a hood. Do you know what I mean?
That's exactly what it sounds like to me.
Like it's been pulled over, and typically I find that unusual. Do you know why I find that unusual?
Well, I don't know, but I felt like they needed more leverage. But go ahead.
What do you mean leverage?
Because they ended up being strangled, right?
Right.
And so if you've got a hood, if you've got a sleeve being used as a hood, I imagine it is around his face, the idea being whoever did this could be behind him holding it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that would be more leverage to strangle him.
Yeah, I just don't picture how the twine or kite string, depending on which you believe is accurate. I don't picture how that helps with the leverage in terms of, I almost think of a garrote. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think he was actually, I don't feel like the strangling was necessarily done with the sleeve, but I think that it was almost like a reverse smothering.
I kind of agree with that to a degree, but here's the thing about interpreting as a blindfold. This is what I found interesting. Why do you blindfold somebody you're going to kill?
Because you are okay, especially if it's his shirt, right?
Right.
The actual victim shirt.
Yeah.
This is a very, very. It could be a little bit planned, but even if it was planned, I don't feel like the perpetrator or perpetrators had any idea who they were going to kill. And so they are just literally flying by the seat of their pants.
So you think this is improv?
To an extent, yeah, I do. Because especially since they used his shirt. I mean, if it was planned, they would have the tools they needed without stripping the victim.
Yeah. Yeah, that part, like, I kind of lean towards what you're thinking more than this is a face mask, because I'm always confused when they start talking about blindfolds and hoods over the head and they kill the people. Sometimes I think it's because, like, I picture it being someone you know and you having difficulty doing whatever you're doing.
And that would be typical, but I think in this case, I don't think it really had anything to do with blindfolding him so he couldn't see them. I think it had to do with them trying to get a handle on him, like to physically kill him. And obviously, if you've got something thrown over your face and then if there's tension causing it to be very like smothering against your face, you are disoriented, right?
I would tend to agree with you, yeah.
Okay, and so that's how I feel like it was used. I feel like it was used to just, I don't know if disarm him is the right word, but to gain an advantage as far as the perpetrators go. How I imagine this scene to be going out, to be happening is, like, it went from a cordial situation to an adversary to a we're going to kill you situation, like, really fast.
Well, so they go on to describe body 2. It says body 2 was that of a Caucasian female observed to the immediate left of the path in a crevice in the stream bank. The body was in a semi-crouched position with both feet toward the stream, the head facing toward the bank, bent toward the chest, and more or less jammed into the crevice. This body was held in this position by several large roots that passed across the back of her thighs. Both wrists of this victim had been tied behind her back with similar appearing cloth strips, and a similar face mask tied with similar string as that of body number 1 had been observed. The victim was attired in blue denim trousers, no belt, tan shoes, no socks, light-colored, possibly white V-neck pullover shirt that was noted to have been on inside out, pink panties, and a bra. This victim had long, dark brown hair, and the only jewelry noted was a multicolored shell bracelet worn on her right wrist. Body appeared to be in about the same stage of decomposition as that of body 1, with similar heavy infestation of insects and larvae. Accumulation of creek debris, twigs, leaves, etc., around the body indicated that the body had been there prior to the rather heavy rain, which had raised the creek level to the body. Inquiry of local inhabitants determined the last rain was Saturday evening, July the 8th. So you got some clues here giving you a little bit of a timeline. It says that no visible wounds such as knife wounds or gunshots were noted from a cursory examination of the bodies. However, in view of the fact neither victim's feet had been tied, it suggested that they could have been walked to the scene and possibly shot. Therefore, a search of the immediate area for cartridge cases was made utilizing a metal detector with negative results. The area and the bodies were completely photographed. No effort was made to locate footprints for casting in view of the large number of persons at the scene. Both bodies were subsequently transported to the morgue of Greenville General Hospital, where additional examination was made in an effort at identification. Finger impressions were obtained from body number 2, which in this instance is going to be Donna. However, this was not possible with body number 1 due to the wrinkled condition of the hands caused by the creek water. The clothing was removed from both, and it was noted that body number 1 had Clem, C-L-E-M, tattooed to his left bicep at the shoulder. There were no visible wounds noted. Nothing was found in the pockets of either victim's clothing. Additional photographs were made of the teeth of body number 2, and they noted that the teeth were manufactured or false. They do a pretty good examination of some of the items of evidence here.
So they were saying that they were looking for possible bullet casings or whatever because they hadn't examined the bodies. There was no obvious gunshot wounds, but they just did that just in case because
right.
The officers on the scene or the investigators at the scene, they don't like touch the body to see if there's gunshot wounds anywhere, right?
Correct.
Okay.
A lot of times when you have gunshot wounds, if they're in a situation like this where the bodies have been exposed to water, it is more difficult to tell like where the gunshot wounds are specifically. Like they don't look like they are presented in the movies unless it's a very large caliber weapon. And it can just look like kind of a little dimple with that you have to kind of manipulate to see the actual quote gunshot wound. Exit wounds
Right.
you could see more readily.
Right. And especially in cases where there's water involved or whatever to
Right.
possibly have washed it away. But anyway, they weren't shot. So,
Right. So the items of evidence that they identify in this report, the first thing is they talk about the wrist bindings. It says the wrists of both victims had been bound behind their back with portions of a man's shirt. The pieces were fitted together, and it was determined the shirt had been torn apart, with Donna having been bound with the right sleeve and a portion of the lower right back panel. David's wrist had been bound with the remainder of the shirt. The knots used to tie both were identified as common granny knots, so they're just hand-over-hand knots. They're not any skill applied to that. The shirt was a size 15 to 15 and a half Bonhomme brand with the sleeve length approximately 31 inches. It contained a floral design, was Western in style, and fastened down the front and at both cuffs with shell-covered metal snaps. It had 2 pockets, which were empty, and there were no laundry or other identifying marks found with this shirt. And they kind of, like, they don't say it here, but the assumption that we get from the article and from some of the quotes from the investigators is that, like, this is potentially David's shirt that's missing. I do find it interesting that they piece the shirt back together to see, like, what, like, that. That's one of the reasons that I'm, like, talking through all of this, because they did go to that trouble, I guess would be the word, or they went through that process. Now, item number 2 is face masks. Both victims had cloth masks tied around their heads. The mask around David's head is the left sleeve of a Western-style heavy blue denim jacket having 4 white painted snaps in the cuff. The sleeve had been cut from the jacket and torn down the seam, and the cut area appeared to have been made with a knife. The mask around Donna's head was the right sleeve of a heavy blue denim jacket similar to that from David. It had also been cut from the jacket with a knife. Both sleeves measured 23 inches from the shoulder seam to the cuff, indicating a sleeve length of 32 to 34 inches. Both sleeves appeared to have been cut from a jacket that possessed very little wear, as indicated by the new appearing condition of the white paint on the snaps, the color and condition of the fabric, and the color and condition of the sewing threads. Both sleeves may be fitted to the jacket they were cut from, should it be recovered. So they have part of the jacket here.
right. And so that's a lot heavier material than I was thinking, but I still think it serves the same purpose.
Yeah, I'm picturing a jean jacket based on what they're saying. The above described masks have been tied to the victim's head with 4-ply 3-twist cotton strings. The string recovered from David is 52 inches long. The string recovered from Donna is 35 inches in length. The strings are suitable for comparison with any suspect strings that may be recovered. The shoes the victims were wearing were examined for drag marks, but none are located. Nothing unusual was noted about the clothing the victims were wearing. However, the absence of any items in the pockets is unusual. Further, the fact that David was not wearing a shirt suggests the shirt used to bind the victims could have been his shirt. Now we're moving to the last page of the police report. And this is number 6 Martin Street in Asheville, North Carolina. It says, at the request of Sheriff's Department, Officers McCombs and Stoneball processed the residence of the victim in Asheville, North Carolina. It is pointed out, however, that other officers and people had been in the residence prior. The photographs and observations made reflect the conditions of the house at approximately 4:00 p.m. on July 13th of 1978. Photographs were made of the exterior and interior of the residence. Therefore, a verbal description will not be set out, only observation. The living room was rather tidy, but had not been recently cleaned, which this condition existed with all of the interior. Red and gold cardboard box contained a small amount of marijuana. It was found under the sofa. I think what they're describing there is a cigar box. The large ashtray on the coffee table contained True and Kent Light cigarette butts. These are the same brands that they find in ashtrays throughout the house. An open pack of Salem cigarettes was found on the stereo stand, which may or may not be of significance. They described that no furniture was overturned. The kitchen was small. There were 2 water glasses and a butter dish containing a 1/4 pound of butter, which had been melted. They were sitting on the table. There's a saucepan that had corn in it on the right front burner of the stove. There's a shallow frying pan containing remnants of liver and onions to the left of the saucepan. The sink was filled with dishwater and contained 2 dinner plates and other apparent dinner dishes. The dish rack to the left of the sink contained washed and dried dishes of various types, and the refrigerator contained various types of food, a partial bottle of Seagram 7 Crown whiskey, 2 bottles of wine, 3 full glass containers, and 1 partial container of chocolate pudding. The trash can contained a meat container, which previously had held liver, and an empty chocolate pudding carton. The general impression of the kitchen was that dinner had been finished and the occupants here were cleaning up when they were interrupted and left. No furniture was overturned. The bed in the master bedroom was not made. The closet contained clothing hung on hangers and soiled clothing in a box on the floor. Dresser drawers contained folded, laundered clothing. The top right drawer of the dresser contained numerous glass bottles filled with marijuana seeds, roaches, and other smoking materials. If you're new to marijuana, you don't know what that means. Roaches are partially smoked joints. The other bedroom contained toys for a child in a toy box, although there was no indication a child had been living in the home recently or in this room. There was no evidence that a struggle had taken place in the house, but the distinct impression was gained that the occupants had left in a hurry for some reason, either voluntarily or involuntarily. There was no denim jacket with sleeves missing. There was no string found. They also missing from the home were house and car keys, a woman's handbag, and a man's billfold, which suggests the occupants left voluntarily. However, none of these items were found with the bodies. All correspondence notes, papers containing names, addresses, telephone numbers, photographs, etc., were recovered and turned over to Detective Blanken for a study and analysis to develop potential leads. So that's what we get for the police report here, what they kept.
Right, and I feel like that got everything started off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I will say this. Okay, so I don't think I agree with their final assessment there.
With their final what? I'm sorry.
The final assessment there, saying they left in a hurry.
Right, I feel like they were just young adults who ate dinner and didn't feel like cleaning up afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. And not only do I agree, I sit and review footage from all types of crime scenes. While most of my work is now with like felony crime scenes, I can tell you, both from a professional perspective and the fact that if you came into my house on any given day, like none of what they're saying there necessarily means what they seem to think it meant in 1978. I think these people, like if these were not victims of a crime, I would say they're lazy and they didn't put stuff away. And maybe they only did the dishes like once or twice a week. But I would not go to the extreme that this was any indication of them leaving in a hurry, not leaving in a hurry. And they leave out a big element of this is if I were to go missing and people could not find me. Depending on if my wife were missing with me and who discovered I was missing, people would come into my house and rummage through shit to try and figure out where I went. Like, that's just
that's true, right?
So we don't know what mom did or friends did to attempt to like find a clue.
Well, sure, and I feel like it was, they very. I feel like they used the corn on the stove or whatever, right? Is that what they said?
Yeah, there was corn and liver. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was their last meal, probably.
Or like, but the other side of this is, and I'm just throwing this out there because it's what I do. maybe the people had their identification and went and lived in their house for a day and drank half a bottle of Seagram's and made liver and onions because it's the only thing in the fridge. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
I don't think that at all. But
Well, they
because
clearly drove around in their car.
right, but this is back in Asheville, and the car was found in South Carolina, stuck.
Well, no, the car is found in North Carolina.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, and the dogs are found in North Carolina.
Hold on.
That's one of the things that's so weird about this. Let me make sure that I'm saying this correctly. So here's the supplemental report, and we'll get to the car in here. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Can I
fine.
read some? Okay, let me.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It was found in Madison County near a swimming hole.
Yeah. So the car, and I did this before we got on here, and I forgot to send this to you. Okay, so people know where this location is that we're talking about. The bodies are to the south. The car is to the north.
From the house?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Madison County, North Carolina is north of Asheville. Tigerville, South Carolina is south of Asheville. But it's all basically one road. Like you could take 25 today, maybe 26. You could run up and down to get between these places. They have a supplemental report on here that I'm going to pull from for a second. This report is made later on, but it has all like the details about these two. So David is born in 1949. So he would have been turning 30 in 1979, just to give you like an age range. This supplemental report that's put together has a date of October 9th, 2024. It basically says, was there any kind of show of force? It says no. I don't know if I agree with that. It says, do they have a terrorist affiliation? Not terror related. Does it have a hate group affiliation? Not hate group related. And then it gives us the particulars on Donna. But they don't mention her age for some reason in here. Their drug use is unknown. Alcohol use is unknown. Were there any injuries? It states no. There were no visible or non-visible injuries. And the narrative says, in July of 2024, I began reviewing this case as it is assigned to the cold case unit. In summary, on July 11th, 1978, the bodies of David Clemshaw and Donna McCracken were found along a creek bed from a nearby bean farm off Barton Road in Route 3 in the Tigerville area of Greenville County, also known as the Dark Corner. The original report states that the location is in the Travelers Rest area, although it is possibly closer to Taylor's, yet still in the Tigerville Dark Corner. David's body was found in the creek with his arms bound behind his back at the wrist with what appeared to be a section of a Western-style dress shirt. His denim jeans were pulled down just below his buttocks, although it's unclear if his pants were unbuttoned or unzipped. It is noticed that the right front pocket is turned inside out from the crime scene photos. Clemshaw was wearing white underwear, white sneakers, but had no shirt on. Original investigators assumed his own shirt was used to tie him and Donna McCracken up. Donna's body was found 15 feet away up the embankment of the creek, and what the crime scene photos show is some type of hole with her body surrounded and covered with branches and foliage as if to, quote, cover her up. Her body was found curled at the waist in a submissive position with her hands bound behind her back with what appeared to be a Western-style dress shirt. Her body was fully clothed, though her shirt was found to be inside out. Both victims had shirt fragments bound to their faces, masks, with a type of twine that was reportedly used for tying beanstalks together. But to the state of decomposition of both the victims, no sexual assault kits were performed on either victim. Due to Donna McCracken's shirt being found inside out, it is the belief of this investigator that she might have been sexually assaulted. The same could be said for Clemshaw since his pants were pulled down, although his underwear was still in place. I think that happened from pulling him. Or potentially from the water moving around him.
That's my thought, too.
There was no billfold or purse found with the bodies of the victims, no house or car keys either. 2 days later, on 7/13/1978, the victim, David Clemshaw's car, was found in Madison County near a swimming pond off of Big Ivy Road along the Big Ivy Creek. This investigator searched Google Maps for this location, had difficulty locating it. From the crime scene photos taken of Clemshaw's car, appeared to be stuck in the sand. The victim's dogs were found in West Asheville near the Gorman Bridge Road, which is reported in the original case file to be a back road in Madison County. The victims were last seen Friday, July 7th, 1978, between 4:30 and 5 p.m. Saturday the 8th and Sunday the 9th, the victims were unaccounted for, but were supposed to be meeting their friends, and the names are blacked out here, at a music festival in Cherokee, North Carolina on that Saturday, but they never showed up. The victims, Climshaw and McCracken, both lived together at 6 Martin Road, Asheville, North Carolina. The house was searched by investigators with the Greenville County Sheriff's Office as well as detectives from North Carolina. It was observed that the house had little mess with some dirty dishes in the sink, and the victim, McCracken's rings near the sink, showing that she had been or was about to wash dishes. Also in the house were 3 types of cigarettes, Kent Light, True, and Salem. There were no billfold or purse for either victim in the house either. On July 9th, 2024, I reached out to the original investigator, Tommy Siegler. He advised me that he still kept in touch with Donna McCracken's younger sister and that she was the only living relative. Siegler also stated that she did not want any contact with this agency because she did not want to relive the trauma of losing her sister all over again. Siegler stated that he was newly appointed to the homicide unit when this case was assigned to him, and that for about 6 months he rented an apartment in Asheville while he worked this case. He stated that during the course of the investigation, it was learned that 2 local subjects of the Western North Carolina area were heard bragging about the murder and ditching the car near a swimming hole. Those 2 subjects are deceased, and they are not identified here in a way that you can read it, but their names are there. They're just blacked out. From the original case file, I was able to find statements from a subject who was interviewed by Utah Probation and Parole, an agent named Linda Tansey. In that statement, they stated that several people were over at his house in December of 1978, and while getting high, several subjects, 2 of which were these, they decided to go and rob a local gas station, and upon returning to the house, they were counting out the money and bragging about how they hitchhiked to go look for some pot a few months back, and they were picked up by a man and woman driving down the road, and they had robbed and killed the couple and ditched their car in a swimming hole near Ivy Creek. One of the 2 mentioned that if he was driving the car, it would not have gotten stuck in the sand. When looking at the crime scene photos, it appears that the car is indeed stuck in sand. Both of these gentlemen were interviewed while in prison for the robbery, but neither confessed to the murders in this case. Siegler stated to me he is convinced that the 2 of them were responsible for the murders of McCracken and Climshaw, but he could never prove it. In the case file, there were several articles about the murders. It is possible that they were simply bragging about the murders, since it was very regularly reported by the media. It is unknown if the information about the car being stuck in the sand is mentioned in the news. And then he lists other potential suspects that are crossed out, but it states all 3 subjects are of American Indian descent and were known for several serious felony crimes. Other than their mention in the case file, there's no evidence or leads that would suggest they had anything to do with the murders of David and Donna. From 1979 to 1987, there were several murders that occurred along the Western Carolina region that were committed by a serial killer, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you they blacked that out here.
It was Hyatt, was it not?
It is Hyatt. He was convicted of 3 murders. 4th victim survived and escaped. The cases were worked by Buncombe County and the NC SBI. He names the detectives here and says that Detective Benjamin from Buncombe County had since retired, but Timothy Shook was around and he was able to talk to him. That was the special agent from the SBI that had looked at that case. After reviewing notes with the case file that he sent me, it appears that the gentleman we were talking about is Terry Hyatt, is not the suspect in this case. And at some point, we're going to talk about him pretty soon. During the first week of August 2024, I had traveled to Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. I met with Detective Michelle Skeeters. Skeeters provided me with access to their records office at Buncombe County Courthouse. I was able to spend the afternoon scouring through old cases from 1976 to 1979. And I came across the case file for the armed robbery that was committed by the other suspects the night they allegedly bragged about the murders of McCracken and Climshaw. Skeeter provided me with a copy of the case file for my records. And following this, I went over to the Asheville Police Department and met with Detective Kevin Taylor and Sergeant Charles Wells. From there, I was provided their case file in the McCracken and Climshaw case that their agency had assisted on back in 1978. I was able to take and make a few copies of photos and other documents and notes that I did not believe were in the original case file in Greenville County, South Carolina. After reviewing back over the case file at my office, I observed several key points of interest that looked at the complainant as a potential suspect. This is going to be the person who's affiliated with the land at the time. From the original investigation, this investigator has learned that not only did they have prior knowledge of the incident location because he was the foreman of this plantation, but he stated that he provided the twine used to mine the victims. He stated that the twine was placed in the field about a month prior. This investigator also learned that he had been charged with assault with intent to rape in Hendersonville, North Carolina, but that case was dismissed. What he's referencing there is a February 28th, 1978 attempted rape. Then on September 9th, 1979, just over 2 months after another incident, he was caught by U.S. Park Service Rangers and charged federally for kidnapping and assault of a couple along the Blue Ridge Parkway. I have reached out to both Henderson County Sheriff's Office and the U.S. Park Service for assistance finding those old case files. Good luck with the Park Service. Lieutenant Brad Woodson advised their old records are no longer available and that the last charge that he had was a 2007 case for a non-physical sexual assault. Special Agent Les Wachowski of the U.S. Park Service stated that he would get me the case file for the federal charges by mid-September. Also in the case file, another subject from Greenville County stated that confession had been made to him for the killing of Donna and David. In the report, he later admits that he knew the victim, Donna, and that she was, quote, a hooker, meaning she was a prostitute. Interviews were conducted by the original investigators from Greenville County Sheriff's Office and from Asheville. There was no record or history of Donna McCracken ever having been a sex worker. A polygraph was given by the FBI back in the early 80s with regards to this case, and he showed no signs of deception. On September 23rd, 2024, he notes, as of this date, I've made several attempts back to the U.S. Park Service, as well as Henderson County Sheriff's Office with no response. On Friday, September 27th, 2024, Hurricane Helene struck the western North Carolina region, causing severe flooding throughout Asheville and around Buncombe and Henderson counties, as well as other surrounding regions to include the Blue Ridge Parkway. This investigation for now will wait before reaching back out to those agencies for assistance with this case. I've asked SLED's DNA lab to review the property list for this case and give their suggestions on what evidence to submit for testing. As of now, this case is still active. So that's a supplemental report that goes with this. And honestly, I think this case could be solved. I think they have a couple of hard leads there. I could go on for hours about how fascinating I am by like the timeline that's lapsed here and all the things that are being said.
Do you think that, okay, so if we go back to back into, I guess we don't have everything here because the initial reporting officers that make the report in 78, the guy that he talked to later, the investigator, he's not listed on the report, right? So he had his own set of reports, I assume.
He's the person who would have made notes based off that first report. So we have the supplementary case file, but we don't have the original case file. We only have the original incident report and body discovery.
Right. And so it seems to me that once I was trying to look at the timing, I think, let's see. Is that just in the supplement? Yeah, it's not in the initial, right?
Right.
So he recaps it, though, and it seems to me like at that point in time, that investigator, he was convinced that he had a case that was solved with no evidence to adjudicate it.
Yeah.
Okay, and so he stopped working on it, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, and so it's my opinion only that in those types of situations, he says that he has no corroborating evidence to charge them. Why wouldn't he feel like the statements given by while he's subject to probation for some reason, the independent witness, why would that not be considered evidence?
It is to a degree evidence. It's not conclusive. So here's why it's not. In that case, where you have the deceased individuals now that they never really get the confession from, they have the third party statements. Mm-hmm. Those statements are good enough to investigate them further. But unfortunately, if you go to court with that, it would be hearsay because it's a third party recounting an event. And it particularly becomes problematic in a situation like this for the reason that the person filing the report of the bodies being discovered has enough of an interesting record that a good defense attorney would sit down and point at him for reasonable doubt, having abducted and assaulted others.
Yeah, I guess I got a little bit turned around because of all the redactions.
And that's the reason I wanted to bring this case up. Okay, what's missing from here, which I understand why he does it, because he's using his narrative to describe his theory, and he's redacting people that could potentially be innocent. The way you have to look at that is, even though we know who Terry Hyatt is, because you can look for the dates and times here, and he's redacted him as being part of this. The other people are more difficult to find, and that's the ones that people should go hunting. Not like, look, a couple of these guys are deceased. It's not going to hurt if you go through newspapers.com and you figure out which store gets robbed when and start piecing this together and put it on a Reddit thread or a Web Sleuth thread or whatever and start talking about it and getting people to talk about it. Because, in my opinion, those names of the deceased persons could be public at this point. Because that's how, like, putting a timeline together on those people, that's how you get more evidence if they're the ones who did it. And I believe that the complainant should be made public, the person who found the bodies, because that's how you get more evidence on potentially people who knew him.
So was he actually the one that found the bodies, or was he the one who owned the land the bodies were found on?
So, all right, the way it's explained from the paperwork we just pulled, he doesn't, I may have said landowner, but he's the supervisor of a bunch of migrant workers at a bean farm next to where the bodies are found. So he has access to the land, access to the twine. The people who actually find the bodies and call the police, I believe, if I'm reading between the lines correctly, they don't originally want to be identified, probably for different reasons than they're criminals. More likely, they might not be documented. They might not have thought they'd be taken seriously. So essentially, their supervisor, who is this guy who's attempted to, abduct a couple, and he has a couple of sexual assaults in his.
Okay, so that is the same guy then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Based on this, that's what I'm reading is that it's the same guy. So he's listed as a complainant in the first report, and then this guy circles back around to him because he has more of a history, including an assault all the way in 2007. That guy should be public. And like the information about those cases should be public because like if you know the dates and times and the mechanisms of what he was doing in those other assaults, maybe you find other assaults and maybe you find other evidence that he did this. So my point is, you can't really write off the two dudes that say that they were hitchhiking and robbed and killed David and Donna and got their car stuck in the sand. But I didn't find a mention of the car being stuck in the sand anywhere outside of this article. But it could be there, and I could be missing it.
Right, but to me that's very credible because this is a third party saying that he heard them say it, and why would he know that otherwise?
I agree with you, 100% agree with you. But I do understand why the investigator calls this like open and we need more evidence because he needs to know, am I looking at the complainant? Am I looking at that other couple? I would argue that like you also kind of need to know if they're connected in any way. Like, do they know each other? Is it, is there something going on? Because if these people you get weird in terms of the geography of these events. It's almost like separate things are happening. Like, did those guys ever work on this farm? Because you're in Asheville, they leave and go to do something that results in their car ending up north of Asheville in Madison County, their dogs ending up west of Asheville. We don't know what happened there, and their bodies ending up far south of Asheville. Like, how does all that like jive together? Even though these locations are only a couple hours apart total.
Do you think they took their dogs with them?
I think they would have. If I were going to a music festival, I would have my dogs in the car.
Yeah, so I think they took their dogs with them. I think they picked the guys up closer to home than further away from home. I feel like it was a cordial situation at first, because otherwise, unless you can put the landowner up in North Carolina for some reason,
Right.
like how does he end up there, right?
But like the one thing I like, and this may be just me, like when I have my dogs in the car and I'm going somewhere to do a thing, it's a giant pain in the ass to put anybody in my car.
No, I agree with that. But the 70s were a different time as far as that goes.
And the car is much bigger than what I drive. Like I drive big cars, but like there's not the space that it appears this car seems to have in it based on the pictures. But also I can't tell if there's 2 dogs or 3 dogs in these pictures. And I understand what the investigator's doing. I'm just applauding him for being this open and like putting this much information out there. I would have pushed it even further.
Well, yeah, and I do think that the complainant that called about the bodies, I feel like his name should be public. Maybe.
And the Park Service people need to get off their shit because they do this with other cases.
But right now, though, I do agree it's possible that everything in this case is gone at this point, because especially since like all the hurricane stuff happened.
Yeah, I mean, they digitized some of
I'm talking about like DNA evidence.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Ooh.
I don't know for sure, but I do know that area was hit really hard, and so I don't know. But I can say, and I also don't know because they were like partially in water or whatever. Hand ties, which I realize are David's shirt, they would be particularly susceptible to possibly having DNA still on them.
Yeah.
From the perpetrator.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
There's some other like the car also, I mean, it was stuck in sand, not in water. I don't know where the car is, but it would definitely have DNA on it.
Yeah.
Because whoever got that, because you know that because their bodies were found in South Carolina and the car was found in North Carolina, like they didn't drive the car to get stuck in sand, right?
Yeah.
But there would be DNA all over that car. I doubt it still exists.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
I don't know if there were swabs done. I kind of doubt that too. It is just 2 dogs.
Is that what you see in the pictures? I couldn't tell if there's a third one and 2 of them were similar looking.
So there's a picture with both of the dogs, right?
Right.
And then there's a picture of the other dog.
I gotcha.
But the other dog is in the background. It's just 2.
Okay.
One's a golden retriever sort of looking. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me.
And then I thought the other dog was small, but now that I see him next to the golden retriever, he's not very small. But I don't think that I think the dogs were left in the car. Like, I don't think the dogs knew anything was wrong.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Depending on what all happened, it's because I do think dogs would react. I have a dog that weighs about 5 pounds that would kill absolutely anybody that tried to hurt me. So it doesn't really matter how big the dog is, but if they have no idea what's going on, they're not really going to react. I can imagine they probably freaked out, which is why they let him go. But I feel like whoever did this had an idea of leaving letting the dogs out in North Carolina closer to where they lived. Perhaps they had let the dogs out before they even went to South Carolina. Like, we really don't know. There's a lot of things, but the hitchhiking thing, it sort of adds up.
Yeah, I tend to agree. If for no other reason, and I may be doing the wrong reason, if for no other reason, then you have to have, in my opinion, multiple people.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially since they weren't shot, right?
Yeah.
I do feel like this encounter went bad really quick. And I do think that the fact that it doesn't give any sort of amount or anything, but when you've got people hitchhiking to go buy pot, which is what they told the witness that came forward, when you've got people hitchhiking to go buy pot, like, however much cash he had could have been like a very intriguing, like somebody that's not thinking clearly would have thought that killing a couple of people over cash was a good idea, right?
Yeah.
And that's really sad, honestly, but it seems like it's more a situation of, whoever did this, whether it's anybody mentioned in any of these reports or not, they're terrible people and, obviously very misguided.
Yeah.
And it's a sad situation all around. I can't really figure out why her shirt was on backwards. It does seem like maybe there was a lot happening there as far as like rummaging through their pockets and stuff. That's a really weird situation.
It is.
That's very cold-hearted.
When I look at this situation overall, so first of all, I'll just say like this area in terms of like the courts and like how the criminal justice system works has a ton of activity, a ton. Like one of the things that you can do is see how many ADAs and public defenders are assigned to an area, if that makes sense. And when you do that, you kind of get a feeling for how busy the courts are there, meaning how many suspects would you have, how much crime happens. They have like 15 ADAs and like 18 assistant public defenders in this area. So I'm saying that from the perspective of that court must stay full with serious charges for that many people to exist. Like if you go like to the middle of North Carolina, like Wake County area, you are seeing comparable numbers to that. When Wake County is like one of the biggest areas there. I think Mecklenburg might be like the biggest area, but I was looking at it from the perspective of like, what is your suspect pool like? And I can't wrap my head around like all these different suspects being named here. Because he lists a bunch of people that are redacted and basically says like there's no indication that like he thinks they're a part of it. He lists 3 folks who apparently, from what I understand what he's saying, most of their files were federal. They apparently live on the reservation. He refers to them as American Indians who have been in the court system a lot. But I will say one thing about this case that really is probably the whole reason that I'm looking at it is the parks people don't get back to him.
Right. I just realized something. The narrator states that I've asked SLED's DNA lab to review the property list. Like the stuff is in South Carolina.
It's all in South Carolina. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I realized this, which I guess was part of the possibly less planned than it ends up being beneficial to the perpetrators. Obviously, we are this many years out with nothing, but it's a very confusing case.
It is confusing, but like I still think I believe the evidence may like lend itself to like solve some of this. But
yeah, if it's there, they will be able to. There are certain, even if they can't get an exact identification, I mean, some of the identifying characteristics will be found in the DNA, which could lead to other things, right? Yeah. Like if the DNA from the crime scene shows that they were, quote, American Indians, end quote.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh,
like
yeah.
that would, but given a lot, now granted, so hearsay is allowed in some situations. It would be more so allowed in a situation where the person that would testify, which would be the perpetrators, or be called to testify, they're not available any longer.
I mean, you're 100% right, but also you have to consider the fact that, like, if we really get down to knowing it's these two guys, the hearsay part of it's kind of irrelevant since they're dead, because we're not actually going to court to try and, like, convict them.
Right, but okay, but tell me this though. So the original investigator, he gets this information, they talk to him, they say it's not them. But if they had charged them with the crime and got the guy on the stand to testify, he can say what he heard the defendant say.
Yeah, they can do a number of things there
And
in terms
the
of
event they
exceptions.
didn't,
Yeah.
and in the event they didn't testify, the jury or the judge would be left with the impression that that's what they said.
Yes.
So I'm not really sure why they didn't move forward on this. I mean, it good on the detective for wanting more. However, that was 78. This is 25.
See, I think part of this, and this is just me, because I don't have a lot to wrap this up cleanly. I was really using it as an example of, like, the U.S. parks being a pain in the butt and, like, how true crime, like, the direction it should go. But the truth is that a lot of cases that you have helped me identify over the years through your terminology, adjudicated but not solved but not adjudicated.
Right.
I think it falls to the bottom of the pile if you work in a busy area like this, and those people are already doing prison time where they're not going to get out for a very, very long time. I think that you have other things to do. And I'm not saying this is the way it should be, but I have seen how busy it can get in a much less congested area. And if you've got 20 looming serious assaults, sexual assaults, and homicides, and this is number 20, and you think that those guys are like 90% responsible for this, and you can't get it to charging, but you feel they're never getting out of prison per se, or they're not getting out for many, many years, maybe you focus on the thing that, like, is more looming. And this case gets further and further away from your mind.
Well, I don't disagree. I feel like this is a perfect example of a situation that was solved but not adjudicated because there was no evidence, or at least they felt like there was no evidence. I sort of disagree with that, but I'm also not the investigator or the prosecutor. And it is firmly in that pile until this investigator comes along and he files a supplemental report that's dated last year, basically, bringing everything back around together. And what will happen from here is if SLED responds, which I don't know how much he needs from Western North Carolina really at this point, but if SLED responds that, hey, we still got the car here, or we've still got the hand ties here, I don't know what you would call it, the things that were binding their hands, right?
Yeah.
If they've got evidence that can be DNA tested, I feel like that could move the case forward. And it could either, because one of two things will happen. It'll either confirm one of the different perpetrators is more likely the suspect than the others, and they can investigate it that way. Or it could lead them in a completely new and different direction, which would further the investigation that way, right?
Yep.
If it were to exclude people, right? I feel like this is convincing. Anytime you have a situation where the investigator who is clearly diligently working on it, and then they say, I know who did it, but I can't charge them because I don't have enough evidence, and they drop it, most of the time it is the people that he says he feels like did it, but he doesn't have the evidence, because otherwise he would continue working on it, right?
That's what I think, yeah.
And this is a very sad case. Obviously, the sister that's mentioned, she doesn't even want to talk to investigators because she just gave up.
Yeah.
and it's been so long now that she doesn't want to relive that terrible time in her life. And she's the only living relative, according to what the new investigator puts in the report. So there's nobody advocating, right?
Yeah.
And not to mention, you're not going to get convictions anyway, unless it happens to be a different perpetrator who's still alive. And some of these cases, like, it's a little astounding to me that this is where it ends up. He did have I feel like he's acting in good faith because he did put all this out there, even though some of it's redacted. But I'm interested to see, hopefully this is going to go a little somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately your idea is probably like the correct path here. Like really, if they've got those bindings somewhere in Greenville and they get them over to SLED and SLED test them, they're not looking at a needle in a haystack. They're really trying to compare them to, like, you know, a handful of people. It's like 5 people mentioned in here, 8 if you count some of the outliers, that they're really just trying to compare them to whatever is on the binding. If there's some DNA on the bindings, then the case is over. But the alternative to that for me, and the reason for being an advocate for the direction this goes, is like, well, this way, the sister doesn't have to be involved at all, because she clearly is probably still traumatized by all of this. But, you know, you could timeline these people. If you release the rest of these names and you put them together and, you know, put Reddit and Web Sleuths and Facebook and all that on them, then people can, like, even for deceased persons, they can go through and say, oh, I remember this crime that they did and that crime that they did. Or some prosecutor somewhere says, holy cow, I retired, but I remember there are at least 3 of these crimes that were real similar to this that I didn't have enough to get this person on. And it was in that area during that time. So there's this opportunity we have to, quote, solve crimes where, again, it's likely going to be the DNA that does it. But if the DNA is not there and there's nothing on the bindings, I don't see anything wrong with releasing the names from the perspective of, you know, go hunt, find. Because that's what they kind of inadvertently did in the Asha Decree case recently. And everybody's talking about that on other podcasts. I'm not going to talk about that yet, but because I feel like something weird is happening there, where, like, there's an accident that turns into a body concealment. Ultimately, with cases like this, there's so many of them that all you have to do is really put one cold case investigator on the idea of, this is a pretty simple document summarizing in this style supplemental report, which, don't get me wrong, he did work here. There's a lot of work. Like, he went places, talked to people, put pieces together. But ultimately, these type of supplemental reports that sort of summarize what original investigators thought on these older cold cases, that could lead to a lot less unsolved murders.
Well, it's the only way that it's going to lead to a lot less unsolved murders, because otherwise this just sits where it sat.
Right. And so everybody else is talking about Karen Reed, and there's still podcasts talking about Delphi, and there's still all these different things going on. And I thought that one of the best ways for you and I to use this platform would be to amplify what these kids are doing over at WBTV. Because of the way they put this together and what Sergeant Cox is trying to do. And I felt like that would be a more responsible use of our platform to talk about these cases.
Yeah, I hope that we have a follow-up for it. It'd be great.
Yeah, that would be awesome if SLED comes back and says, hey, we solved this one. You know, they've done some interesting work, and the North Carolina SBI have done some interesting work in older cases, and kind of more recent cold cases. I don't really... Like, that was the thing I was going to ask you today. Where is the line with the cold case? Like, what do you consider a cold case? This is 46 years old. It's definitely a cold case.
Well, it doesn't have anything to do with time. A cold case, like, you could have a murder that happened today could be a cold case in very short order. A cold case is where it's not being actively investigated and it's not closed, and there's no real leads to follow.
I think I think that's the part. I think that the lack of leads is,
and depending on the situation, depending on the situation, like what happened and who is investigating it, a case can go cold very, very quickly. It unless they have something to work on or some sort of you never should make up leads, right? But there's some investigators who find more leads than others. I will put it that way. And a case can go cold very quickly. There are all kinds of things that distinguish between a case that gets solved very quickly and a case that goes cold very quickly. It could be pressure. It could be circumstances. Obviously, newer cases, there's more evidence possibilities, right? Like video and obviously DNA on fresh evidence, right? That kind of thing that kind of propels cases forward now. Honestly, I feel like it's a lot easier, and it's more of a thing where the wait time has more to do with how long the technology takes to render the decision of the answer, right?
Yeah.
And that's a lot different than this case, like, from 1978. But if they have it still, it could be in line with newer cases as far as the DNA goes.
Yeah. Well, so, this case comes out of me having gone down a rabbit hole with some of the last couple things I was doing. And next week is going to be another rabbit hole that I'm down, that this case sent me down. So we'll be, unless you have anything else about this particular case, which I really hope they get DNA back on and get solved. That's all I have.
Yeah, no, I don't really have anything else. I would say I do think a lot of cold cases, they are in that pile of cases that the investigator got a good handle on what they thought happened, and for one reason or another decided that they were never going to be able to go anywhere with it. And that's an interesting twist if you think about it.
It is, right? Like, it's technically an unsolved case, but somebody knows.
Right. But I would say that, like, most of the time, cold cases have some version of that element to them, or they just have people that aren't great investigators. Either way, really.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.